Now, the Indaba Foundation and Stellenbosch University have recently launched a discussion paper on economic and social benefits of investing in early childhood education. There is a broad agreement on the importance of the early years of a child's life. It is important to know what the benefits are of any investment in childhood development. For more on this, we're joined by Phelisa Nkomo, who is one of the contributors to the discussion paper, as well as Andre Shearer from the Indaba Foundation. Thank you very much to the both of you for joining us. I just want to start with you, Phelisa. In terms of this, I just want to understand why in South Africa we're still discussing why early childhood development is important.
Well, and I think actually the timing of the launch of this discussion paper is so important. We're celebrating Youth Month. We're confronted with a crisis of high youth unemployment, for instance, at 66.2% of young people who are disengaged, unproductive. The society is absolutely not contributing anything in that. And I think what this paper seeks to do is to then say, how do we set up a very clear trajectory going forward, that when you and I are framed and we have nothing, to contribute in society, and that we have invested, we're confident that we invested in a younger generation that's going to be, making correct decisions. So with the work that we've done with the Indaba Foundation under the leadership of Andre, which he will speak a little more about it, what actually had come out quite very clear is that investing in a foundational education for children does not only contribute in their self-esteem, but also in the human-based value system or human rights value system, but also it really helps them to be able to actually start, to become industrious in their lives much more earlier. So, and I think what's become quite clear in South Africa now is that for a long time, early childhood development had not received sufficient attention. In fact, you would know, by the way, that early childhood development had actually been placed with the social development, and women who are running early childhood centers were just getting grants with little intervention in terms of the curriculum, the quality of the infrastructure, where they are, and the support in terms of the equipment they require. So there's a shift now into Department of Education. And part of what this paper wants to do is that now that there is a shift from a policy perspective, it is important that we make it sure that, we don't make the same mistake, but also we contribute in the discourse in a way that allows both the practitioners, the women who keep children in the backyard, women who keep children in Ronneville, to be part of the conversation, and that any form of interventions around early childhood development must be contextually linked, but it must just not be something that completely comes from above. And as well as we want policymakers to start allocating much more resources that are required in the sector.
Okay, let me bring in Andre. Andre, it still goes back to my first question to Phelisa in terms of why. She said in her answer that for quite a long time, early childhood development was still a debate in South Africa. I mean, so long after democracy, we all know exactly which children suffer in terms of not actually achieving adequate early childhood development. Why are we still discussing this today? Why isn't it something that we just do? Why isn't it second nature to our government?
Masego, that's actually the greatest question. The fact is that the average boardroom in the world doesn't understand what a creche or a daycare ultimately does. If you really look at the infrastructure build of an education system, if you don't invest in the early years, you're actually never going to achieve the long-term outcomes. You just simply can't. So you're quite correct to ask why. It's the exact reason why the Indaba Foundation, which is a New York-based foundation, decided that in the context of South Africa, we wanted to be advocates to ensure that the changes are seen as vital. If you look at brain development, if we do not look after and nurture and nourish our children in the young years, if we don't say in the first 2 to 3 years that we're actually willing to invest right amounts of money, recognizing that our investments in early childhood in this country comparative to the great educational budget is infinitesimal. It is so small, and that yet we bemoan the outcomes in the latter years, in the high school years or matric years. We do not have a viable workforce, and we will not have a viable workforce in South Africa unless we address the issue correctly. Now, the issue, most children in South Africa that are in need are in the outer-lying and in the rural areas. So the problem is we've got to find a system that allows us to reach the communities where they are, We talk about registration of centers, all that's very important. Safety, health, security, crucial. But our worldview is there must be 250,000 women in the sector who are undervalued, disrespected. It's a women's empowerment issue. It's an entire economic sector that should be prioritized as a massive investment need. And also just the kind of education. We've developed something with the AMI organization in Amsterdam. It's a community-rooted education program. The women learn, firstly, yes, numeracy and literacy skills are vital, but life skills, grace and courtesy. We live in a nation where trauma is evident everywhere. And our job is to try and build the base of a pyramid that allows a child to be raised in a sense that I'm respected, I am respectful, I appreciate my surroundings, I respect the teacher who's teaching me, and for the teacher to realize that she is leading these children daily. So our job is to try and figure out how do we most quickly access these 250,000 women, empower them with a method that brings them much closer to raising a whole child, and then supports the parents and the communities to understand the importance of early childhood is probably, I would imagine, if we invested just 10% of our annual academic budget into early childhood instead of the less than 1%, we would transform the national economy within a decade or generation into something incalculable. I say that, I use the word incalculable because we cannot possibly imagine how much the return would be on social benefits, emotional benefits, the impact on crime in society, the health. You would be healthier citizens, healthier mentalities, and a much more productive workforce more early.
Now, I want to go back to what you said in terms of it's also about empowering the women who are in this industry to actually ensure that there's adequate early childhood development for all, particularly in rural areas. But also South Africa is that country where it's so easy to open up bogus creches or preschool centers, right, where we find children dying or actually not learning properly. But it's also about the parents who just take their children there without checking if this particular preschool will be good for my child. So it's an all-round issue.
It completely is. So our worldview is that the actual recognition of quality and safety at centers is just as important. But we do believe that the starting point is not to exclude. We could very easily say, unless you have a certificate of compliance, you may not belong. But that would be self-defeatist. We need to say, let's take the view that we need to train everybody in the sector, and the moment these individuals are incorporated into the training, we then have access to them on a database to ensure that we can support them and then vet who is or isn't actually enabled and who should or shouldn't stay based on the subsequent criteria of quality standards, the building structure, the fire and safety, the health, all the other elements. But to me, it's just there are so many women who teach and look after children, as you say, daily, irrespective of any controls, and that's the vast majority of our 6 million children are kept in those unregulated areas, but at least we need to know where they are and who they are.
Exactly.
And that's our first defense, to reach these women, to help them understand their value and how they can be much better role players in the future economy.
Yes, exactly. And I want to come back to you, Sis Phileni. When you look at it, is this an issue only in South Africa, or is it a vast issue in the continent? Because, every time we talk about this, when you look at, obviously, developed countries would be much better. But we have been told so many times by the minister herself that the South African education system is somewhere really below par compared to others, even in the continent. So is this an issue that is mainly with us, or is it an issue around the whole continent?
Well, I think the continent is way ahead compared to South Africa. Even though, comparatively speaking, from a spending perspective, we're spending a little more. I think there's much more structure in several countries, for example, and that's why in South Africa people can just even leave the schooling system and come and work in South Africa and offer an artisanal skill, which part of it is linked to the quality of education. Currently we're spending about 6.2% of GDP in education broadly, but there's no specific data in terms of the early childhood development. And we think that along the lines of your previous question to Andre, we think that it's important that to establish a system where you trace children, that because currently our system now, you can only trace children at birth, and then between the window of between birth and 6 years, you actually don't know exactly where they are. And I think by making sure that you develop a structured system, you're going to be able to trace this. But at the same time, once you also invest in good quality curriculum, then you know that, in fact, as the children are actually growing up and becoming, older or younger people, is that you invest even less on education. So if you look at our system current of investment, we invest more on a higher education. I mean, you are aware now that a lot of people have access to free higher education, but in fact, the sector unto which we're supposed to be doing a lot more investment much more earlier, so that people are actually feeling much more confident they can start their lives without actually dependent on having to sell their labor in the labor market or place a price of their labor in the labor market. And currently they are not. So South Africa has is kind of like behind in terms of other countries, but at the same time, it has an opportunity because it has resources. So what it's required, it's coordination, it's consensus, right? But also at the same time is to really get to make it sure that you allocate your resources appropriately. And once you have that, then you are actually going to be able to set up a new trajectory for young people in this country.
And I think what you're saying is quite right. We've had a chance for quite a long time. And, it begs the question, why are we taking so long to actually get the system started and going as rapidly as it actually needs to and deserves to? But Phelisa, before I let you go, I know that you were listening to an interview that I had with an economist from Investec, Annabelle Bishop, where she's saying that it's not so bad that we got this loan from the World Bank, especially looking at how the repayment rate is so low. But you disagree?
Yes, no, I mean, I do disagree. I think first, South Africa is such a capable country to be trapped into a second round of debt from a multilateral institution. It is such a risk for countries like South Africa, who are highly industrialized, to actually, kind of like give over their economic power planning. I mean, the taking on a loan from institutions like World Bank, it also has to do with letting go of your own domestic governance. And slowly with this loan, we're starting actually to do that. The second issue, for instance, I mean, I don't know, a lot of people are aware that we have not even used the industrial capacity of this country between 2020 and 2021. We're underutilized for about 22%. So it means that this country is actually able to build a vibrant economy, and therefore we're able to absorb so many people. But what is the real problem is the architectural planning from the state and as well as private sector. And that's why we're actually looking for shortcuts. Taking a loan is actually a shortcut. It's also consistent with the policy of neoliberalism, which amongst those is actually
I'm so sorry to have to do that to you, Ms. Phelisa, but we have run out of time. Thank you very much to the both of you for speaking to us about the importance of early childhood development. A perfect time to speak to them about that as we celebrate Youth Month. And